Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the session of the 2020 Postal History Symposium, sponsored by the American Philatelic Society, the American Philatelic Research Library, the Smithsonian National Postal Museum, and the United States Philatelic Classics Society. I am Susan Smith, the Winton M. Blunt Research Chair at the National Postal Museum. Our presenter for this evening's session will be Yamil Kouri, Jr. He will be presenting U.S. Post Riders in Spanish West Florida, 1801 to 1810. It is my pleasure to introduce Yamil Kouri Jr., a nationally and internationally acclaimed philatelic judge, an award-winning exhibitor, and on December 9th of this year, the Sunman Lecturer at the National Postal Museum. He is the author of close to 180 articles covering a wide variety of subjects. He focuses primarily on the maritime and military mail of Spain, former Spanish colonies, Cuba, the United States, and several European countries. Yamil is a Fellow of the Royal Philatelic Society, London, a numbered member of the Royal Hispanic Academy of Philately and Postal History, and a member of the European Academy of Philately and the International Postal History Fellowship. He belongs to more than 20 philatelic organizations in the United States, Latin America, and Europe. He is the president of the Postal History Society, a member of the board of the American Philatelic Congress, and chairman of the board of the Spelman Museum of Stamps and Postal History. He is the former president of the Cuban Philatelic Society and past editor of its journal, The Cuban Philatelist. He has served as vice president of the American Philatelic Society and is currently the vice president of the Federación Interamericana de Filatelia. Yamil organizes the annual Spelman Museum Postal History Symposium, now in its 7th year, and is vice president of the Boston 2026 World Stamp Expo. His notable philatelic recognitions awarded for exhibiting and writing include the following: the U.S. Philatelic Classics Society Ashbrook Cup in 2004 and 2019, Classic Society Distinguished Philatelist 2019, the APS Champion of Champions also in 2019, and the American Philatelic Congress Walter R. McCoy Award in 2013. Welcome, Yamil.
Hello, and thank you for listening to my presentation titled The American Post Riders in Spanish West Florida between 1801 and 1810. And how is this related to the topic of our symposium? Well, in terms of postal innovation, as far as I know, this is the only instance in which American post riders operated in a foreign territory within North America. Similarly, it's also unprecedented for Spanish territories to have a foreign mail service operating within their possession. I'm going to briefly cover the following topics. Briefly, the history of the territory of West Florida. I'm going to mention the importance of Natchez and Fort Adams in the Mississippi Territory for this type of correspondence. I'm going to show you the land route running along the east bank of the Mississippi River in which these post riders travel. And I'm going to show some examples of early mail in the northwestern part of Spanish West Florida. And the bulk of the presentation is a number of covers showing the participation of American post riders in Spanish West Florida, both before the Louisiana Purchase, between 1801, when this type of correspondence first appears, and 1803, and after the Louisiana Purchase, when New Orleans became a U.S. territory, beginning in 1804, until this type of correspondence ended in 1810. I'm going to show a couple of examples of mail via the rare southern route. And finally, I'll describe the West Florida Rebellion of 1810, which put an end to this fascinating type of correspondence. Briefly, a history of West Florida. It was first discovered and explored by the Spanish in the early 16th century. There were a number of expeditions inland. The first European settlement in what is now the United States was Panzacola, settled by the Spaniards in 1559, although they abandoned it in 1561 to return a few years later. The second nationality to come to this region was the French, which explored the lower Mississippi Valley and the part of the upper or northern Gulf of Mexico, and had a number of settlements since the late 1600s. Then came the British after the 7-Year War, in which France and Spain lost against Great Britain. The British exchanged Havana, which had been captured the year before, for Florida, and then had possession of the Floridas for 20 years until 1783. Then the Spanish came back. The Spanish joined the American Revolution against Great Britain in 1779, and the governor of Spanish Louisiana, residing in New Orleans, Bernardo de Galvez, quickly attacked every British territory in the lower Mississippi River Valley and in the upper or northern Gulf of Mexico. Between 1779 and 1781, all of these possessions were taken by the Spanish. And then formally, the British ceded the Floridas back to the Spanish, which held it from 1783 until 1819. For a brief period, barely over a month, there was the Republic of the Independent Republic of West Florida, a rebellion in 1810 in the northwestern part of Spanish West Florida, which I will mention briefly. And then the United States quickly took over or incorporated that territory. And between 1811 and 1813, the U.S. Army gradually occupied all the Spanish, most of the Spanish cities in the upper Gulf of Mexico. And then by the Adams-Onís Treaty of 1819, Spain sold the Floridas to the United States, and the occupation was finally consummated. The U.S. Army took possession of both Floridas in 1822. This is a map in 1763 made by the British when they acquired the Floridas or Florida from the Spanish. They, for administrative purposes, they divided it into East Florida, which is east of the Apalachicola River, and West Florida, which goes west of the Apalachicola River to the east bank of the lower Mississippi River, south of the 31st parallel. All to the east bank, except for this area here, which is known as the Isle of Orleans, which since 1763 had been part of Spanish Louisiana. These remain administratively part of Spanish Louisiana. This schematic is a little bit easier to see. You can see the main cities in the in West Florida: Panzacola, the capital, Mobile, Biloxi, and in the western part of the state, Baton Rouge. It also shows Natchez and Fort Adams in what was then Southwest Mississippi Territory, important to the theme of our presentation. This is the area where the correspondence that I'm going to be discussing takes place. West Florida was Spanish from 1783 to, for practical purposes, at least part of it, until 1822. This was French Louisiana until 1763, then it passed to the Spanish, which held it until 1803. And this was British territory until 1783, when the United States gained their independence, and it became American U.S. territory. The town that concerns our theme is Natchez in southwestern Mississippi Territory at that time. It was founded in 1716 by the French. After the 7-Year War, it was ceded to the British, and it was taken by the Spanish in 1779, which held it until the Treaty of San Lorenzo between the United States and Spain in 1795, in which they agreed to give it to the Spanish, however, to the Americans. However, it wasn't until 1798 when U.S. troops finally occupied Natchez. A year later, the first post office opened in Natchez with a monthly service. The service became fortnightly from the beginning of 1801 until at least October of 1802. And it became a weekly service from March of 1803 until at least the beginning of 1804. This is a map drawn in 1804, a close-up of a map showing the Mississippi River going north to south here, Natchez, and Fort Adams. Fort Adams was initially a Jesuit mission, but founded by the French. Father Davion ran it for at least 20 years. And then when it passed to British hands, the name changed to Loftus Heights, as you can see here. In 1798, after the Spanish left Natchez, General Wilkinson established the fort at Loftus Heights, called Fort Adams, at a bluff overlooking the Mississippi River, with a commanding view that made it an important defensive position in case the Spanish planned an attack. It was roughly 40 miles south of Natchez and 6 miles from the frontier, from the border with Spanish West Florida. This here shows the land road running along the east bank of the river. The next slide shows a sketch of the city of Baton Rouge in 1804, then part of Spanish West Florida. That also shows very nicely the land route running along the east bank of the river, going through rivers and marshes and little hills in the area. This is the route used by American post riders running between the southwestern United States at the time and the important city of New Orleans. I'm going to show a couple of examples of early mail in northwestern Spanish West Florida. Mail going all the way to Natchez from New Orleans, and it shows that the Spanish did not have a formal mail service covering this area. The mail service in Spanish Louisiana and Spanish West Florida really was purely maritime mail service, and inland mail was either carried privately or by couriers, either government couriers or military couriers, or by an occasional traveler. The lettering on the left shows a cover sent in 1794, the earliest one I've seen, to Natchez from New Orleans. The sender wrote per the post, but as I said earlier, there was no formal postal service, so this must have been carried by a government courier. The letter on the right was sent in 1797, also from New Orleans, to Concordia. Concordia was another Spanish name for Natchez. And it was sent by the Louisiana governor, the Spanish governor of Louisiana, Manuel Galloso de Lemos, to his wife, who was spending some time there, Margarita Watts Galloso. These are other examples of early mail carried by military or government courier. The letter on the bottom, fairly early, 1780, from New Orleans to Baton Rouge. It was sent to the commander of the fort at Baton Rouge, Pedro Favrot. And this letter was sent to a famous and very prominent land surveyor, Vicente Pintado, also from New Orleans to Baton Rouge. Another name for Baton Rouge that the Spanish gave was Nueva Feliciana. As you can see here, Nueva Feliciana. Curiously, this is a plot of the land survey by Vicente Pintado, showing the land owned by Pedro Favrot here. A fairly large lot measuring 1,000 arpents. Arpents were an ancient French measure of land. Roughly 1 arpent is about 1 acre. A couple more examples of mail in northwest West Florida, carried privately. The letter on the top was sent in 1799 from Bayou Sara. You see it here in the little map. It's just south of the border with the territory of Mississippi, and it was carried privately. I'm sorry, from this one from Baton Rouge here to Bayou Sara, just south of the border with the American territory. The letter on the left was sent from Montesano, south of Baton Rouge, to Thompson Creek, just north of Baton Rouge. Again, carried privately. We see the name of the individual who carried the letter as a favor. When was the formal mail service between the United States and the Spanish territories first established? Well, we know that from a correspondence by the then U.S. Postmaster General Joseph Habersham to the Spanish minister in Washington, D.C., Carlos Martinez de Irujo. This is an excerpt of the communication, very important. I'm just going to mention the highlights. A post road has been established at the last session of Congress from Natchez to the boundary line on Loftus Heights. And at the end, he asked the minister if there is a public post established from New Orleans to any place near Loftus Heights where an exchange of mails could take place. I have not been able to find the response from Irujo to Habersham, but evidently an agreement was reached. Let me mention briefly the role of American post riders at that time. The post office did not hire mail carriers. It simply contracted individuals to carry mail from one place to another for a period of time, carrying out a number of trips for a certain amount of money. And these were contract workers back then. And we know that American post riders are mentioned in some of the correspondence that I will show you. They were very reliable, and in some cases they were entrusted to collect payments and to deliver money to the addressee, and also to carry some merchandise. There's letters that mention that the post rider is taking a shirt for you, etc. Some of these post riders appear mentioned in the books of the Postmaster Generals. One of them, Ferdinand Claiborne, was the older brother of William Claiborne, the first governor of the Louisiana Territory. Interestingly, that the U.S. Postmaster General books only mention the route between Natchez and Fort Adams for these post riders, but not the route all the way to New Orleans, which is curious. And you'll see why. How reliable were these post riders? Well, this is a letter the excerpt of a letter sent by General David Bradford, who was involved in the Whiskey Rebellion. He fled the United States in 1794 to escape arrest by George Washington and settled in northern Spanish West Florida. He was given a land grant by the Spanish governor, where he settled his plantation called Myrtle's Plantation, which is still standing today. This is a contemporary picture of his house. And he mentions, "The post is the only conveyance of certainty. Address me at Natchez or Bayou Sara. The postmaster at Natchez knows where I live, and all letters will be forwarded." So to sum up, mail exchange between the U.S. and Spanish Louisiana via West Florida was formalized in April of 1801 between the U.S. Postmaster General and the Spanish minister. The exchange point was Fort Adams in Loftus Heights. There is correspondence known from early 1801 to early 1804 that has both U.S. postal rates and the postal rates for the Spanish transit. Who collected that? I suspect it was the post riders. So far, I have identified 82 letters known with postmarks or rate markings, which is about 36% of the correspondence known, mostly in archival collections. So the average collector has not seen most of this type of correspondence. And interestingly, the rates are typically expressed both in U.S. cents and in bits or reales, which was a Spanish currency at that time, but they only appear in southbound mail, not in northbound mail. Let me show you quickly the type of local currency in use at that time. On the top right, you see the Spanish piece of 8, or the Spanish peso, which was divided into 8 reales. It was also referred to as the Spanish $1 and it was equivalent to a US dollar at the time. Because of the shortage of coinage, the peso was often cut into pieces called bits. One bit was equivalent of 1 real or 12.5 US cents. And sometimes even smaller denomination currencies were used. The half real is also known as the picayune, which was equivalent to 6.25 US cents. These are the likely postal rates that apply to this type of correspondence that I have deduced from the limited amount of correspondence. There's a handful of letters sent within Spanish West Florida to New Orleans with low rates of 1, 1.5, or 2 reales, and no American fees because it originated in the United States. Letters from Natchez generally mostly show the 2 reales or bits fee without the American currency. Letters from the United States via Natchez were charged 25 cents generally, depending on the distance, if prepaid, plus the 2 reales um, transit fee through Spanish West Florida. Unpaid letters, and this is the key thing, unpaid letters were charged 2 plus 2, 2 reales, equivalent to 25 cents, and 2 reales for the transit through Spanish West Florida. This tells me that the post riders were collecting the entire fee from the addressee, not just the transit fee through Spanish West Florida, but the American fee. That is a revealing piece of information. Double weight letters that were prepaid in the United States, 50 cents, were charged the double weight rate in transit through Spanish West Florida. Triple weight letters unpaid, there's only a handful that I have seen, were typically charged 12 reales, but sometimes the accountancy was off, and some of them have a 10 reales due marking. Ship letters, I've only seen one, have the additional 2 cents fee in the United States, and they were charged an additional half real in Spanish currency. Why do I think that these rates were not collected by the Spanish Post Office? Well, the archives were very detailed, and I have studied all of them. The main and the only post office in Spanish West Florida was in Panzacola. It was a maritime mail post office, and although in the late 1700s they do show some ground correspondence, all the entries from the early 1800s, the period where this correspondence was taking place, as you can see in this column, value of the ground correspondence for the entire year, the grand total was 0. And this is 1803, if I remember correctly. So there's no proof, no records in the Spanish archives, which are quite detailed, that the Spanish Post Office kept any of this money, for which I believe it was given to the mail carriers, to the post riders traveling along this route. These are a couple of examples of mail from Spanish West Florida before the Louisiana purchase. These were sent within Spanish West Florida. The one on the top right was sent in 1803 from Thompson's Creek, which you see here, just north of Baton Rouge, to New Orleans, charged 1.5 reales. The one on the bottom was sent from Bayou Tunica, close to the American border, and it was charged 2 reales postage due in New Orleans. They both indicate per post. Many of these letters also indicate mail, as opposed to when they were carried privately, the name of the individual that was carrying it. These two covers, since they originated in Spanish West Florida, they obviously do not have any U.S. postage markings. This is mail via Spanish West Florida before the Louisiana purchase. The letter on the top right was sent from Charleston, Ohio in 1803 to Natchez. In Natchez, it was handled by a forwarding agent that left his manuscript marking on the back, who paid the 25 cents American fee for a letter, single weight letter, not exceeding 1/2 of an ounce, carried for more than 500 miles. And then the 2 additional reales here, or 2 bits that you see here, show the transit fee to Spanish West Florida. The letter on the left was sent in 1803 from Baltimore via Natchez per post, as you see in the lower corner. It did not get an American rate on it of 25 cents, but it must have been 25 cents because the letter was charged a total of 4 reales postage due. 4 reales meaning 2 reales for the single weight rate in transit through Spanish West Florida, plus an additional 2 reales to cover the 25 cents American fee. And this, in my opinion, is proof that the mail carriers, the post riders, were the ones collecting this fee, and they later on paid the post office, in this case, the post office in Natchez, which was the terminus for the U.S. mail service. These are examples of letters showing both currencies. The one on the right, sent in 1802 from Philadelphia to New Orleans, has the 25 and the 4. Again, the 4 paying 2 reales for the transit, plus 2 reales for the American fee. The one on the left was sent in 1803 from Baltimore to New Orleans, showing both fees, 25 on the right corner, and for, this is the abbreviation for reales. This is a typical abbreviation, this is an RS, indicating that this is indeed a Spanish rate. These are letters that were prepaid within the United States. The one on the top left, sent from Winchester, Kentucky, posted in Lexington in 1803 to New Orleans. By the way, nearly the entirety of this correspondence was addressed to New Orleans because the archives, Shepard Brown and others, were merchants in New Orleans. And most of these letters are taken from microfilm, and thus the quality of the illustrations is rather poor. So this letter was paid 25 cents plus charged 2 reales for the transit through Spanish West Florida. The one on the bottom was a double weight letter, weighing no more than an ounce, paid 50 cents within the United States from Washington, Pennsylvania, to Natchez, and then from Natchez as a double weight letter, charged 4 reales for the transit to Spanish West Florida to New Orleans. And these are very interesting letters. The one on the top right was sent in 1803 from Natchez to New Orleans. This is the only one I've seen with a postage expressed in American currency entirely, $1. By the way, it is believed that the symbol of dollar was first popularized by Oliver Pollock, which was an American commercial agent in New Orleans, abbreviating pesos. So the pesos became the symbol of dollar, and this $1 is equivalent to 8 reales. So I suspect this is a fairly large letter, a double weight letter on paid, 4 reales paying the transit fee to Spanish New Orleans, and then 4 additional reales paying for the 50 cents from Natchez. The one on the left was sent in 1803 from Cincinnati to New Orleans, a triple weight letter, charged 75 cents in the United States, with a total fee, since it was unpaid, of 12 reales, which would be $1.50, or 6 reales for the 75 cents, and 6 reales for the transit fee through Spanish New Orleans. These are 2 additional examples of triple weight letters, but the accountancy doesn't always match. The one on the top left has a very faint Philadelphia circular day stamp here. It was sent in 1802 to New Orleans, a triple weight letter in the United States, charged 75 cents unpaid. And then the addressee was charged 10 reales. It should have been 12 to cover both the American and the Spanish West Florida transit fee. The one on the bottom is very interesting. It was sent from Liverpool to New Orleans, received in Boston, where it was rated 77, 2 cents for the ship fee, plus 75 cents for a triple weight letter carried for more than 500 miles. It went to Natchez. In Natchez, it was carried by, I believe, an American Post rider into New Orleans, and it was rated 10.5 reales. The half would be the 2 cent ship fee, the 10, perhaps this is a 12, I can't tell for sure, but it was for the triple weight letter, paying both the American and the Spanish West Florida transit fee. Northbound mail is not nearly as exciting because it does not have any Spanish rate fees or markings. This was a letter sent in 1802 from New Orleans to Philadelphia that was either carried privately or carried by a post rider but posted in Natchez. The addressee was charged 25 cents in Philadelphia. It is possible that the post rider who carried this letter was paid in cash by the sender to take it all the way to Natchez. But that is speculation on my part. After the Louisiana Purchase, beginning in early 1804, this agreement was either void or ignored. And we see an interesting correspondence between the new U.S. Postmaster General, Gideon Granger, and the recently appointed governor of the territory of Louisiana, William Claiborne, in which Granger discusses the establishment of post offices along the route between New Orleans and Fort Adams, but he left it up to Governor Claiborne to determine the number and their location. Claiborne suggested up to 4 post offices, and in order not to offend the Spanish, to appoint Spanish citizens for these posts, but he was concerned about the reaction of Spanish authorities. And this is when James Madison intervened to de-escalate frictions with the Spanish, as you will see in a moment. Madison at that time was the Secretary of State. This is an interesting excerpt of an interesting letter sent by the Spanish West Florida governor, Vicente Folch, to William Claiborne in 1804, in which he states, the exercise of any authority on the part of the United States in West Florida will be considered by him as an outrage of the rights of the king, his master. And after this communication, the Secretary of State decided to ask only for the right of transit and not to establish any American post offices in Spanish territory. After many months of tense negotiations between Madison and Carlos Martinez de Irujo in Washington, by mid-1805, in June actually, the Spanish agreed to allow the transit of U.S. mail through their territory. However, there were a number of conditions. One of them was that the Spanish wanted to inspect this type of mail that passed through their territory. For this reason, the Spanish minister in New Orleans, Marqués de Casa Calvo, appointed Colonel Samuel Fulton, who was a retired French army colonel. He was essentially an adventurer who eventually settled in Baton Rouge, where he married the daughter of the governor, Carlos Grand Pre. Claiborne described him as a discreet person and put him in charge of distributing mail addressed to American citizens in the area. On the right, you see a letter sent in 1808, a weight letter given to a mail carrier, sent from New Orleans to Colonel Samuel Fulton in Baton Rouge. It reads here, weight paid 25 cents. So Fulton apparently carried out this task. These are examples of mail via Spanish West Florida sent after the Louisiana Purchase, in which letters no longer show fees or postage in Spanish currency. The one on the top was sent in 1806 from St. Louis, which had recently been acquired by the Americans after the Louisiana Purchase, prepaid 25 cents to New Orleans. The letter on the bottom was sent from Natchez in 1808 to New Orleans. It was rated 17 cents unpaid for a letter traveling a distance between 150 and 300 miles. And this is a fascinating letter sent in 1805 from London to Baton Rouge, simply writing Mississippi. That must have referred to the Mississippi River because Baton Rouge was not part of the Mississippi territory. In fact, was well in Spanish West Florida. The letter was received in New York as an unpaid ship letter, and it was rated 27 cents. See that on the right corner? 2 cents for the ship fee plus 25 cents for a single letter traveling over 500 miles. And it's amazing that a letter like this made it to its destination. It undoubtedly was carried from Natchez by an American post to Mississippi. The Spanish had no intervention with this type of correspondence whatsoever. These are two more examples of mail via Spanish West Florida sent after the Louisiana Purchase. The one on the right was sent from Bayou Sara, which was just south of the border with the Mississippi Territory, to Washington, Pennsylvania. It was carried privately or by a mail rider, a post rider, into Fort Adams, where it entered the mail, and it was rated 25 cents for a single letter unpaid. The one on the bottom was sent in 1804. It's the earliest letter sent from the American Post Office in New Orleans on February 14th of 1804, with the first example of the straight line marking, sent to Philadelphia and rated 25 cents postage due. And these two examples show how post riders were trusted. These are examples of way letters. Way letters were not initially posted at any particular post office, but were hand delivered or given to a post rider traveling along that route. The post rider was allowed to collect 1 cent for each letter. The letter on the left was sent in 1805 from Bayou Sara to Washington, Pennsylvania. It was rated 52 cents, 50 cents for a double weight letter and 2 cents for the way fee, which is unusual. Typically it was 1 cent per piece, not 1 cent per single weight. The one on the bottom was sent in the opposite direction from Bayou Sara to New Orleans. It was handed over to a post rider who wrote the way 2.5 cents. It does not express the additional 1 cent way fee. It may have been paid in cash. or it may have been collected later from the addressee. So what I've shown you so far is the bulk of the correspondence sent by this route, the dotted route on the map, as you can see here. This route was also referred to as the Great Valley Road, part of which, the segment between Nashville and Natchez, was referred to as the Natchez Trace. The Natchez Trace was a path initially established by Native Americans from ancient times. It was an infamous route, sometimes referred to as the Devil's Backbone. But it was a fairly long route, as you can see, from Natchez to the border with Spanish Southwest, Spanish West Florida to New Orleans. So in the early 1800s, the U.S. Congress authorized a shorter route called the Southern Route, which was 500 miles shorter than the previous one. It went all the way to Fort Stoddard, in what was then part of the Georgia territory, and it crossed Spanish West Florida, passing close to Mobile, to the Pearl River, to New Orleans. The Spanish also allowed transit of American post riders through this segment of Spanish West Florida, although at times during disputes this option was closed, and we have examples of mail sent from Fort Stoddard to Pinckneyville near Fort Adams, and then south to New Orleans in this segment. Mail from the carried on this route during the period of Spanish West Florida is rare. These are a couple of examples sent in 1808 from New Orleans to the northeastern United States via Fort Stoddard. The one on the left says FS mail. The one on the right says mail via Fort Stoddard. There's only a handful of these letters during this period, transiting through Spanish West Florida. So when did this interesting type of correspondence end? Well, by the early 19th century, the Spanish population in the northwest part of Spanish West Florida was minimal. It was a handful of government officers. The overwhelming population was Anglo, some German as well, French, but this was a Spanish colony with very few Spanish settlers. And then in the early 1800s, Spain was in crisis. It had been invaded by Napoleon. It was in the midst of a war of independence against France. So it was a very weak and troubled nation or empire. And those, for a long time, there was a lot of disagreement between the Anglo settlers of the region. So in September of 23rd of 1810, a group of 80 armed men captured the garrison in Baton Rouge without much fighting. And 2 days later, they proclaimed the Republic of West Florida. The resident of Montesano Cliff, just outside of Baton Rouge, named Fulwer Skipwith, was elected president. But barely a month later, then President James Madison quickly annexed the territory and authorized at the same time that the governors of Louisiana and Mississippi occupy by military force, if needed, the lands west of the Perdido River. The initial claim of the Republic of West Florida, this was their flag, was up to the Pearl River. This is here Biloxi, so this was west of Biloxi. Not very ambitious. But Madison wanted much more, and he went all the way to Panzacola, west of Panzacola, and claimed those territories that were gradually occupied by American troops without any resistance from the Spanish between 1811 and 1813. So this is a map that shows the gradual annexation or occupation of the territory of West Florida by the Americans, beginning here with the Republic of West Florida, and then gradually moving east to the Perdido River, and eventually purchased in 1819 with the Adams-Onís Treaty, which gave the Floridas to the United States, and the United States at the same time renounced any rights to Texas, which was also in dispute. And this puts an end to this type of fascinating correspondence. Hopefully we'll learn more about it in the years to come. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Yamil. That was a very interesting and thorough presentation on Spanish West Florida, something that I knew very little about in terms of postal history. For all of those of you joining us for this session, we want to thank you for your attendance, and we ask that you join us on behalf of the 2020 Postal History Symposium, the American Philatelic Society, the American Philatelic Research Library, the National Postal Museum, and the United States Philatelic Classics Society in thanking Yamil for this presentation.